Hello, everyone. Thanks so much, Rachel, for the intro. Thanks to Mirna and Hannah and everyone of Sonic Acts for organizing this event, and to Astrida and Murphy for the really amazing kickoff to the day. I, as Rachel shared, am an artist, activist, architectural researcher from New Orleans, Louisiana in the US. And these days I'm based in the United Kingdom. I've been there for about 5 years and moved for a number of reasons, but in part to pursue my master's and ultimately work for forensic architecture. My mission was to kind of direct their attention to the human rights and ecological atrocities unfolding in my homeland. And I'm very grateful that this mission was a success. Forensic architecture is a human rights and environmental violence investigative agency that is based at Goldsmiths, University of London. They use architectural methodologies like cartographic analysis and 3D modeling and different types of shadow analysis and video techniques in order to investigate state and corporate crime. And they were founded by an Israeli architect named Eyal Weissman, who specifically wanted to use these tools to investigate Israeli state violence against Palestine, the nation, and its people. So I just returned on Monday of this week from New Orleans. I was there for 2 months, and it was an incredibly rich and full time. And I very much wanted to come today and share some new work in progress, thoughts and experiences that I've been having. But it is actually incredibly difficult when your world is so rich and when you are confronted by and kind of embedded within life and death being very present. It's very difficult to kind of step back and reflect and analyze. And I've kind of come to realize that, that space is what being in Europe offers me, the kind of stepping away from life, actually, where, you can kind of take this clinical observer position and start to dissect the life worlds and the violence that is being perpetrated against them. So I look forward to actually doing that work now from the vantage of London over the next days. But I guess to share just a little bit about where I just was and what I experienced, I wanted to just offer, and I was also inspired by the way that Astrida and Murphy started their presentations and by Mirna's introduction, to just share a video that is from a Musicians for Palestine march that took place in December of last year when I first arrived in New Orleans. And this was, in a lot of ways, my welcome home, and to me really embodies so much of what is meaningful and important about New Orleans. And I'll just play like a few seconds. So, as you might know, New Orleans is famous for its musical culture, but its general kind of celebration of life amid unbelievable atrocities. And I wanted to share this video because these unbelievable atrocities is what I tend to deal with and grapple with in my work. And being home, going home again and again, going from this vantage of studying the violence and then living amid it and in spite of it, and feeling joy and camaraderie kind of against all odds. Those two things really have to go hand in hand. So yeah, my time in New Orleans began with this march in solidarity with Gaza, where we could hear slogans that are forbidden in Europe that I hadn't heard at marches in London and in Berlin. Long live the Intifada. And we have, so much exuberant creativity being directed to maintain and express solidarity with people who are being oppressed, halfway around the world. So from here, I was able to spend the holidays with my family, and I was investigating a massive refinery fire at one of the largest plants in the United States. In so doing, I got sick from petrochemical emissions, and I also had to start reporting on some new fumes, these noxious fumes that are seeping into my mother's house that were also keeping me up at night. So I spent a lot of time in New Orleans coughing, as well as laughing and crying and going through archival documents and taking boats out into some of my favorite oil fields in the wetlands, and dancing in the streets because it was also carnival time. Waking up at 3:30 in the morning to go out with Skull and Bones in order to wake up the neighborhood of Treme on Mardi Gras Day. So it was incredibly rich, and there is much to take away and to kind of leave me full as I kind of situate back here in Europe for the next months. And keep me full with the reminder of what it is that is worth fighting for, what it is that we need to hold dear to and protect. Oops, there we go again. So I'm going to just give some of the context of my work, and then I'll screen a couple of films. So as I mentioned, I've been doing a lot of work for the last few years with forensic architecture, but I have a personal investigative practice that goes back 15 years or so, really catalyzed by my experience of Hurricane Katrina as a teenager. And my family, among a million other families, were displaced from southeastern Louisiana. It was my senior year of high school. And since then, I've been trying to understand what are the foundations and the forces that actually propelled this more than meteorological, unnatural disaster of Katrina, how we wound up where we are today. And I realized that, that investigative process required me to start digging deeper and deeper to understand the racial segregation that placed Black and Indigenous people in the most geographically vulnerable, precarious regions. And to understand that, you have to understand Jim Crow policies, and you had to understand slavery and colonialism. And of course, you had to understand the role of the fossil fuel industry, the way that the fossil fuel industry is heir to the logics and landscapes that were constructed and reconstructed by settler colonialism and slavery. And so I'm going to tell that story now, the story of the oil industry. So in the beginning, there was oil. So read the didactic text at the New Orleans Audubon Aquarium until a few years ago when it was altered following numerous complaints. I might be partially responsible for this. You arrive at the tank, if you can imagine it, after slowly descending through a building on a spiraling downward slope. You pass enclosures showcasing creatures and representing landscapes from all over the world, as well as the harm that's been caused by human societies to those ecosystems. You pass through displays on logging in the Amazon and seahorse fishing in China. And then finally you arrive at the centerpiece and behold a two-story tank representing our own geography, the Gulf of Mexico, sponsored by the logos of Shell, Chevron, BP, and ExxonMobil. And at the center of the tank stands a scaled replica of an oil rig, circumnavigated by endangered sea creatures, sharks, stingrays, and sea turtles. So here, unlike every other exhibit in the aquarium, there is no mention of the deleterious impact of human activity on the Gulf ecosystem. There is no mention of the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill, the largest in US history, that spilled 5 million barrels of oil chased with toxic chemical dispersants. But instead, what we do have is this quasi-biblical myth that oil is the source of everything that we hold dear in Louisiana, that oil and gas built Louisiana. So those politicians and corporations that pander this myth do so in full knowledge of the truth, which is that we have followed extractivism's cosmological guidelines to the very ends of the earth. And so my work is an exploration of what remains here, there, in Louisiana, at the edge of land, at the edge of the world as we know it. So what is it that we are creating as we move beyond this edge? So before she was colonized and stripped of her name, the land that we call Louisiana, which means Lewis's land in French, was known as Bulbancha, which means land of many languages in Mobilian, a trade dialect of the Choctaw people. And indeed, southeastern Louisiana, the lower Mississippi Delta, was the meeting place, the trade lands of over 24 indigenous nations. All of this millennia, thousands of years of intentional inhabitation of very dynamic and fluid landscapes was interrupted by the arrival of first French and Spanish, and then also German and US American settler colonists. And then in the 1930s, Louisiana's coastal wetlands were found to be one of the greatest sources of oil and gas in the nation. And oil companies sought the cheapest possible ways to access our vast subterranean fields. But our wetlands got in the way. They carry themselves with a trickster energy. They're thick with mud and vegetation, and a patch of flottant that appeared in one moment to be solid ground would suddenly transform into water in the next. So to hell with them. The oil corporations decided that they would just cut their way on through. So since the discovery of oil, over 100 oil and gas corporations have dredged over 10,000 linear miles of canals in order to drill over 90,000 wells. So the canals allow salt water from the Gulf of Mexico to flow into fresh and brackish water wetlands, which kills the vegetation that holds sediment together as land. The sediment simply disintegrates out into the sea. And so since the 1930s, we have lost over 2,000 square miles and counting of our precious coastal wetlands at one of the fastest rates of coastal erosion in the world. We like to say 1 American football field every 45 minutes. That rate accelerates with incoming hurricanes, which are coming in with increasing frequency and strength with climate change and rising sea levels. So these canal networks that you see here, these photos were captured after Hurricane Ida hit in 2021, and the image on the right is, or left, from your angle, is showing the result of the impact of the hurricane's force, which kind of explodes the canal outward like a bomb. It's a bit difficult to understand what it is we're looking at because you have to remember that these wetlands were so thick and impenetrable that the canals were necessary in order to bring through a barge and drill these oil wells. The land-to-water turnover has been so intense that all of that land has now turned into open water. So from the 90+ thousand wells that have been drilled by way of those canals, oil is pumped up the Mississippi River through 50,000 miles of pipelines, which largely terminate in a region that is known to industry as the petrochemical corridor. And here, hundreds of the nation's most polluting petrochemical plants, refineries, and oil and gas storage tank farms occupy the fallow footprints of formerly slave-powered sugarcane plantations, adjacent to majority Black communities, descendants of people who were enslaved on these very grounds. So the first nickname that was granted to this region was plantation country. So we can understand that from the coastal wetlands to these upriver petrochemical plantations, Louisiana's wetlands bear the full fossil fuel production cycle. And here at the terminus, the petrochemical plantation contains all of the successive strata of violence that form what I call the continuum of extractivism. So extractivism, a system that was first imposed by European settler colonists, European joint stock corporations, has been maintained by US American colonial successors and carried into the present by multinational oil and gas corporations. Extractivism is more than the systematic removal of resources, of matter from the earth, reframed as resources. It's a cosmology, a worldview, as we might say, that holds financial accumulation as the highest value. So to accumulate existence, extractive agents deploy the force of segregation to divide integral ecologies into alienable parcels. Human beings are segregated from our wider ecological bodies, and Black bodies are segregated from the body of humanity. So sugarcane production was historically so grueling that the plantations of the lower Mississippi Delta bore a negative demographic birth rate among the enslaved population. Every plantation more or less required at least one burial ground to hold its dead. And so as the plants in Cancer Alley toxify the air that is breathed by Black descendant communities, they also desecrate the remains of their ancestors. But sometimes these burial grounds survive and even thrive as new forms of life. Groves of trees that were seeded and stewarded by historically enslaved people to mark the graves of their loved ones. So these sacred groves rupture the continuum of extractivism, gesturing to other ways of being in and with the world that flourished at the back of the plantation, flourish still today, and that can inspire us to imagine ways to reorient our extractive societies. So the continuum of extractivism is a concept that is articulated by the state, albeit in its own words. It's designed and enforced by the state. To understand that, we can look, for example, at this 2014 St. James Parish Comprehensive Plan, which reminisces about the era of fabulous plantation life, the day of luxurious living, sumptuous entertainment, and delightful ease. This is 2014, when acres of land were counted by the thousands and slaves by the hundreds. So then it goes on to rezone the majority Black community of Burton Lane as industrial, and to redesignate the majority Black community of Welcome, Louisiana, as a new category they call existing residential / future industrial. So for all of the violence compacted into the layers of earth in the petrochemical plantation extractive zone, this region has been and remains a place where Black people live, love, die, fight, and remember. And it is for these reasons that Joy Banner, a community activist and founder of the Descendants Project and a dear collaborator of mine, likes to remind us that before this region came to be known by its inhabitants by all of these various grim nicknames, that it was for her, as for everyone else, first known as home. And of course, home is a place that's worth fighting for. So to evidence extractivism's mutations, I've tried to adopt diverse ways of sensing the world around me. And so this is not seeing like a state, but what I like to say is seeing through a bird's eye and seeing through an ancestor's eye view, traversing space and time and bringing the corporate agents of extractivism into visibility and toward accountability. I don't know why this isn't playing. Okay. So with the help of my long-term friend and co-conspirator, Scott Eustace of Healthy Gulf, I don't know if this is playing or not, I learned how to access the state's permit records through the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources. And until 2021, those shape files representing the tens of thousands of wells and pipelines and canals were downloadable and accessible by the public. And then they mysteriously disappeared from the internet. But not before I could grab them and create this interactive mapping platform called Follow the Oil, which you can see online, that takes all of this data and organizes it by company. And so this is a currently not functioning so well excerpt from a sort of scrolly telly narrative that is available online that allows users to traverse the fossil fuel production cycle from point of extraction to point of emission via one pipeline that is owned by Chevron. And it does so by crossing scales and looking at the strange geomechanical monstrous earthworks that have been crafted by these oil and gas corporations as they seek to extract the material from the earth. And so on and so forth. And so you'll see some of these lines and points in a different form in a video that I'll share now. So this interactive platform was created between 2020 and 2023. And in 2022, a curator named Kader Attia, who had been invited to curate the 12th Berlin Biennale, read a piece that I wrote about pigeons and race and asked what I was working on now, and challenged me to create a immersive installation, which was something I had never done before. I have been working as an activist and a kind of grassroots researcher in and out of academic institutions, but mostly working on the ground for many years, for over a decade, corporate accountability and environmental justice activists, doing work in the public sphere. But I had never tried to do anything like creating a video installation. But I took up the challenge, and it was really a great opportunity for me to be able to speak with a different half of my brain and heart, where my focus had for so long been in having a impact on public political consciousness, on communicating this information out in a politically kind of graspable way. And there is another mode, another pace, another voice, another way of conceptualizing this information that I also wanted to explore. And so I'm going to just play that now and step away. Some histories are cast in the light of a falling star that extinguishes the dinosaurs and gives rise to the dawn of capitalists, strange beasts that develop tools to segregate existence from itself and put us to work against our own interests. They drill 10,000 feet and 65 million years deep into subterranean oceans, black with soil and oil, life and death. Powers too great for the tool bearers to wield. They raise colonies of primordial bacteria from their slumber and put them to work powering 1 trillion electric stars that are viewable from space, but block the light of the old gas gods. That was when we were lost. Not so long ago, when Earth was sacred, we looked to the stars to show us the way. These days we honor constellations of pipelines and wells drawn by fossil fuel corporations, along guidelines laid by colonial joint stock companies. Haphazard icons unhinged from symbolic logic outline paths to profit and progress that we follow to the ends of the earth. Some say that to know the truth we must ascend, to view the earth through the blue eyes of the state. No. To ascend is simply to bear witness to the lie, to the catastrophe. The clouds break. My heart. Below me stretches the whip-lashed skin of my homeland, flayed and fragmented by 10,000 miles of canals, 50,000 miles of pipeline, and 90,000 wells, carved into the flesh of the earth. Capitalists are voracious land eaters. Their infrastructure devours the black earth, killing the plants that hold sediment together as land, receding the gradient buffer between our ecological community and the storms at sea, displacing place from itself. Their power draws on ecological fission. Humanity is segregated from our wider ecological bodies. Black bodies are segregated from the body of humanity. The end product of segregation is the world's disintegration. Our ecological body becomes a diaspora. The unnatural disaster of colonialism unfurls still today, emitting fractal catastrophes that spawn like sine waves. Coastal erosion, cancer, climate change. What remains at the ends of the earth? Refineries, tank farms, and walls. Walls striving vainly to shore our fragments against our ruin. To accumulate the world, the capitalists must arrest our body's movement, dissect it into private property, and put it to work. They call this place the working coast, but once it was called plantation country. The black earth has been worked as hard as its people, under threat of the whip and the noose and the cement cell block. Black hands levied the river's banks, segregating them from their land. They drained its fluid floodplains, hardening them into an industrial zone. And still, the black hands of our ancestors made life amid fields of death. They offered humble rituals of repair, planting magnolia and willow trees to hold their dead in a more than human embrace. Groves of trees offer their roots, garnished in mycelial threads, to resuscitate soil asphyxiated by monocrop plantations. In the face of industrial dispossession, roots anchor Black communities to their land. Against the tide of coastal erosion, roots hold sediment together as land. Migratory birds land and nest, offering their guano and seeding the next generations of more than human resistance. To know the truth, we must descend and return to the river, to our source. I don't know much about gods, but I think that the river is a strong brown god, and we are its children. The muddy Mississippi gave birth to our land through 7,000 years of alluvial leaps, throwing out skirts of water as she danced, in harmony with the outer continental shelf and the muskrat and the oyster eaters, who called this place Bulbancha, land of many tongues. Our ecology is a messy community of bodies, made of bodies, of bodies. Bodies of land, bodies of water, bodies of people flow and become entangled, become solid through the bonds that hold each to the other. From up here, I do not see like a state. I see like an ancestor with the future in my belly. I see like a bird with a map of home behind my eyes. According to the folk tales of my enslaved ancestors, birds are messengers from the spirit world, and Black humans can fly. I offer this message to you. What remains at the ends of the earth is ecological resistance. Not just humans, but whole ecosystems conspiring to open portals to new horizons. Ashe. This is what the piece looked like. It was a projection on the floor, and behind it were the projection here in Berlin was 2.4 meters in diameter, and then the backdrop are two 1x2 meter prints on rice paper. One of the core requirements of the installation, or remain the core requirements of the installation from here and going forward, and actually for all of my work, is that no plastic can be used. I mean, obviously the projector is plastic, but I didn't want any plastic used in the screen, so we used a piece of board that was then painted, and then the print is on rice paper. And 5 minutes, you say? So I'm going to just share a little bit about the forensic architecture investigations into burial grounds that's been a major part of informing this work. And I'm just going to start by Well, allowing Sharon Levine and Rise St. James of Welcome, Louisiana to kind of introduce the stakes here. So in 2018, a company called Formosa Plastic announced their plans to construct a new 3.5 square mile plastic production facility across 4 antebellum plantations adjacent to the community of Welcome, which, if you remember, is the place that the parish redesignated as future industrial. So this is the community in which Sharon Levine and Gail LaBeouf and other members of RISE at the time lived. And when they made this announcement, Gail said, well, there are graves on that land. And members of RISE and other residents traced their ancestry back to these plantations, the 4 antebellum plantations that had become Formosa's construction site. So RISE worked with a friendly archaeology firm and located 4 cemeteries, 1 on each of those plantations.
No more racism. No more racism. No more racism.
My name is Sharon Levine. I'm the director and founder of Rise St. James, right here in St. James Parish. And we are here to commemorate the graves of our enslaved ancestors. We're going to stand together.
That's right.
And we're going to fight for Mosa.
That's right.
We will not allow them to take our ancestors out of this ground and put them somewhere else.
Right.
We are Rise St. James, and we're going to stand up for St. James Parish. This is our home. We're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Formosa have a fight on their hands.
So RISE and their lawyers asked us at Forensic Architecture if we could develop a methodology for locating burial grounds before industry broke ground. And so among other aspects of the work, we sourced, georeferenced, and then analyzed 140 years of historic maps and aerial photographs. We georeferenced them in our free open source Geographic Information Systems, GIS software, called QGIS, if anyone's interested. And in so doing, we were able to create this digital portal that allows us to travel back and forth in time, tracking the mutations of the land by extractivism. And we studied these historic maps and aerial photographs to learn to read the surface of the earth, to see where groves of trees aligned with, there are 24 cemeteries that are actually mapped among hundreds that remain unmapped and unmarked. And we saw that these groves of trees aligned with the mapped cemeteries. So we learned, the ways that vegetation traces the ruins of the antebellum sugar mill, the sugar factory, and the former slave quarters, and allowed our line of sight to be directed toward these groves situated at the back of the plantation. So these groves, many of them, or a few of them, have been identified by archaeologists as holding antebellum internments, including this one here. Many of them, however, have been impacted by ongoing development. So in the 1940 aerial mosaics, which were the most valuable for us in terms of identifying groves, we saw over 1,000 what they call anomalies that may indicate the presence of burial grounds. By the 2021 satellite image, only 350 of those remained. And so many of them had been destroyed topographically by ongoing agricultural and new industrial development. So you can see here, these are a sample of 6 groves that are highly likely to be burial grounds based on the location that were impacted by development. So this work has been used in a number of ways. It is disseminated publicly. All of our mapping work will be made public through an online platform in April, knock on wood. And it's been used in a number of ongoing legal challenges, including this one, which was a really exciting success until December, until this past December. Essentially, a black female Louisiana judge, which is like already a shocker. She's been removed. Ruled that Formosa's air permits were violated environmental racism laws. And she also affirmed and uplifted Sharon Levine's comments that the land that was worked by historically enslaved people should be considered sacred. So these are those comments. But in December, that ruling was overturned. RISE is going to appeal and the fight continues. And so I know I now have basically 0 seconds, but what I just want to say quickly is that the stewarding of these groves, the historical development of these groves was part and parcel of the life worlds that enslaved people maintained against all odds at the backs of these plantations, where they not only buried their dead, but they also performed rituals, they organized balls, they plotted slave revolts and insurrections with their indigenous allies, and they lived and they stewarded life. And over time, they were forced to clear those forests to make way for the dominion of sugarcane, but they protected these areas where their loved ones were interred. And so these groves are precious cultural survivals that have survived centuries of racial violence, the felling of the forests, the encroachment of cane, the intrusion of the petrochemical industry, and the onslaught of climate disasters. But more than survivals, they are most importantly the front lines of our multi-generational, multi-species, and multi-dimensional resistance to extractivism. And so while we can recover evidence of their existence through the kinds of cartographic analysis that we developed with forensic architecture, from the borderlands of digital technology, I've been called to descend and to touch ground and remember and listen and feel and conspire with my comrades in Louisiana, which means to breathe together. So the next stages of work are exploring the ecological diasporas that are formed between these groves in Louisiana and mirror formations across West and Central Africa and the Caribbean, where our diasporic communities have similarly stewarded these spaces, recognizing that their spirits of the dead survive in the crowns of trees. And so all of these ecological formations and their attendant spirits are a part of this wider sense of internationalism, international solidarity, ecological solidarity that I think is so important for us to realize and uplift today. And I'll end there.